with his legacy for years. वो student थे तभी के उनके शागिर्द हो गए एक तरह से, और मेरी माँ और मेरे पिताजी मिले भी जेपी के कारण, you know, they were part of the socialist movement in the early 60s. तो JP had made a promise to JP on his deathbed. My father had made a promise to JP on his deathbed कि वो उनकी एक definitive biography लिखेंगे. वो बहुत लिखे JP के ऊपर. When he was 91, तब तक वो उनके जो selected works हैं उनको edit किए तीन मूर्ति के लिए in 10 volumes. And लेकिन जब when he was on his deathbed, he remembered this promise to JP. He had made some notes, a few notes, and you know, I was lucky to have an end-of-life conversation with my father. So वो end-of-life conversation कुछ पलों का था जब वो conscious थे. मैंने उनसे पूछा कि is there any regret in your life? तो बोले बस एक regret रहा कि मैंने JP को दिया गया अपना प्रॉमिस पूरा नहीं किया. और हर दिन अस्पताल में मैं उनको कहानी सुनाती थी. मैं बोलती थी आप बिल्कुल ठीक है, हम आज शाम को घर जा रहे हैं. So I told him कि आप बिल्कुल ठीक है, you will be writing this biography, I'm sure you'll write it. But if for some reason you're not able to write it, then I'll write it. तो ये this was a daughter's promise to her father. और इसको भी लिखते वक्त at some points I felt that, you know, my father's life was sort of interjecting, yeah, some way, you know, it was coming together with JP's life. हो सकता है कि I was a huge romantic और ये मेरा ख्याली खुलाक था या जो भी था, but I used to feel that, and I used to feel that I was not writing, it was my father who was writing the book. Chunki I told you that I've written down what I want to say. मैं 3 या 4 कुछ अनूठी पर पुस्तकें हैं, उनका जिक्र करना चाहूँगी बहुत जल्दी से. You know, writing an autobiography is somewhat like self-portraiture. मुझे लगता है, हो सकता है कि मैं आजकल visual art world में बहुत ज़्यादा हूँ इसलिए, but I feel it is somewhat akin to creating a visual art form. Somewhat lifelike, sometimes impressionistic, or even abstract. It is a kind of reclamation, yet so much remains unsaid. And we all know, और इसकी चर्चा आपने किया बहुत अच्छे से विकास झा जी ने, कि सत्य और कल्पना के बीच की boundary. So we all know that the line between fact and fiction is really wafer thin. While discussing the dimensions of autobiographical literature in India, one is almost always tempted to begin with Gandhi's The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Digressing a little, I would like to highlight Gandhi's ingeniously reconstructed autobiography, Restless as Mercury, My Life as a Young Man, edited by Gopal Krishna Gandhi and brought out by Aleph in 2021. It is a 3-dimensional autobiography. It brings together Gandhi's original autobiography, contextual writing outside the orbit of the autobiography contained in the monumental and, I would say, priceless connected works of Gandhi, which run into 100 volumes and are now available online on the Gandhi Heritage Portal. And finally, the intimate accounts of his experiences revealed by his contemporaries, his first biographer Joseph Doe, his close associate Millie Pollack, and secretaries Mahadev Desai and Pyarelal, nephew Chagallal Gandhi. It covers the period from 1869 to 1914, from the time of his birth in Porbandar to the time he left Cape Town in 1914 and a little thereafter, and speaks about his life, family, work, colleagues, his many jail stints, hopes, anxieties, plans, and challenges. We know that his first autobiography was incomplete, and this is what Gopal Krishna Gandhi has done, because this is all in Gandhi's own inimitable voice. So he has left, you know, he's done something amazing. He's brought back Gandhi to us. Approach, because we are offered a new and closer look at his life and struggle nearly 100 years after his original autobiography was published in 1925. Restless in Mercury is how his sister Ralia described the young Mohandas in Gujarati. Part 2 of the autobiography that covers the period 1914 to 48 is expected to complete the story of Gandhi's tryst with history, and I'm looking forward to experiencing that. विकास जी ने आत्म कथात्मक कृति की भी बात की. Another experimental approach I feel is the autobiographical novel. Should it be counted as an autobiography? I leave that question to you, but I'm going to talk about one of them. Of all that I have read, I found Ammi, Letter to a Democratic Mother, the most intimate and open-hearted book. Written by Saeed Mirza, और आप सभी जानते होंगे वो कौन है, he was a pioneer of the progressive new wave cinema in India, who gave us यादगार films like Albert Pinto को गुस्सा क्यों आता है और सलीम लगरे पे मत रो. The novel is a poetic journey into his mother's mind and his own, and a political diary of the time they both lived in, which was essentially the Nehruvian and post-Nehruvian era. There is more than a bit of an autobiography also in his more recent 2023 book, I Know the Psychology of Rats. पता नहीं कितने लोगों ने इसको पढ़ा है. At the core of it is his emotional tribute to his friend, filmmaker Kundan Shah, director of the classic Jaane Bhi Do Yaro, who died in 2017. इनकी दोस्ती बहुत पुरानी थी और बड़ी दिलचस्प थी. ये उनके फिल्म और टेलीविजन इंस्टीट्यूट डेज की दोस्ती थी. उन्होंने दोनों ने को डायरेक्ट किया एक टीवी शो भी जिसका नाम था नुक्कड़, आपने शायद देखा हो. First met as students at FTII. The memories that are recapped are centered on their shared life on the campus. Even while writing about Kundan, Shah holds up a mirror to himself. For instance, until he began to see things from Kundan's perspective, he had not noticed, because he was a bit of a leftist, he is a leftist, he had not noticed that most of the voluble, visible, left-oriented students come from elite backgrounds, inhabiting a world of ideas where social justice, history, aesthetics, and the arts were discussed for their intrinsic value, but their conversations were far removed from the lived experiences of other students who may not have belonged to, I can't say they belonged to subaltern backgrounds, or maybe they did, but they belonged to disadvantaged classes. There are several other anecdotes. The book is dotted with them that shed a light on how not only Kundan, but his own worldview evolved through the cinema they shared and they watched, the books they read, the friends they made. In a sense, then, it made me think that all writing comes from the core of the self, does it not? And cannot be anything but autobiographical, in a sense. A book that I've really enjoyed reading in recent time, and I'm going to end very soon, is theatre icon M.K. Raina's sweeping autobiography, published last year by Penguin Random House. Titled Before I Forget, it is brimming again with delightful anecdotes. In the opening line itself, he calls himself a child of socialism, Indian socialism. And indeed, the episodes of his life read like a social document, sometimes also like a social manifesto. An arresting book, it tells the story of a life lived on the front line of history with, what should I say, just a niban likhte hain, essay, a sort of a essayistic attention to detail. It challenges the fallibility of memory and its imperfections to create a space for the convergence of past and present. Amongst the diversity of encounters is Raina's life in theatre at the core, movingly and rivetingly evoked. Interspersed with the linear trajectory of his own life, this amazing book holds up a mirror to the complexities of Kashmir's contested political history. The tragic and frequent rupture of its body politic, the dense militarization and the ferocity of violence at its many iterations, and gives one a sense of, and I'd like to quote my favorite author, Hilary Mantel, that it gives one a sense of history listening and talking to itself, sometimes even singing to itself. In many ways, it also reminds one of Vladimir Nabokov's autobiography, Speak Memory, and I would like to end by quoting Vladimir. He called his writing a scientific attempt to unravel and trace back all the threads of his personality. This is perhaps what biographies aspire to do. Thank you.
थैंक यू सुजाता। इसके बाद मैं श्री लता जी को बुलाऊंगी। इत्तेफाक से उनकी दोनों किताबें मेरे सामने हैं। हाँ, ऑफ चाइल्ड, और इसमें मजे की बात यह है कि इन्होंने अपनी बेटी के बारे में लिखा है। ज्यादातर हम लोग आदत है हम लोग की कि लोग अपने माँ बाप पे लिखते हैं या अपनी जिंदगी पे लिखते हैं। तो अभी बताएंगे कि इस किताब में क्या है। और दूसरी किताब है देयर वुमन इन अ सिंगल रूम हाउस, क्ली वुमन। क्योंकि मैं चश्मा नहीं लगाए हूँ इसलिए अब मान के चलिए। तो इनसे भी भेंट मेरी गूगल पे हो चुकी है और बहुत अच्छा लगा कि अब मैं नहीं सुनूंगी।
Good afternoon, and thank you for staying the course. I was wondering when I listened to these three excellent speakers, whether I really belong here. So I had a moment of this, like an imposter syndrome moment. But anyway, nevertheless, I'll try and do my best, and I'll try and keep to time as well. So because I was put on this panel, I thought it would make sense for me to speak about two of my new books. One came out last year called This Kind of Child, A Disability Story, which is not just the story of my daughter, but also my own story as a parent of a child who has a learning disability, right? So what does it mean? What does that kind of life look like? And my poem, Three Women in a Single Room House, the collection that SciTech and we published more recently, also draw very heavily on life materials, right? And in a sense, I think Sujata already mentioned it also, you do wonder, like, I think there is no writing that can happen outside of the orbit of life experience. I think life sort of trumps it all, it sort of returns, and it sort of, that's the richest material ever. And I think if you look away from it, and you write in a way that's not, forget the cliche, but if it's not, true to yourself, I don't think the writing comes out well. So at some level, you have to mind that self. You have to mind the self. And yeah, it may not be objective, but I don't think objectivity is really the point of literature. It is, the point of literature is emotional truth, right? So I think that's what, as writers, most of us aim to do when we're writing from our own life, right? So what does it mean to have this autobiographical element, and how does it sort of impact the writing life? How does gender come into it? How does being a parent or being a mother specifically come into all of that? Or being a daughter, how does that come into it? Like, these are a few questions I'll just sort of perhaps touch upon. And also, what does it, as I said, what does it mean to be a writer in the middle of all of this madness? What does it mean for a writer to inhabit this difficult, increasingly challenging world with all its complexity, its materiality? What does a creative life look like for a woman, right? This is a question I started to ask myself after many years of living that life, right? And so what does it really mean? So this is a question which confronted me, and perhaps it confronts some of the others in this room as well. And I think each of us find our own way to navigate this situation of being in love with a creative life, which perhaps much of the world doesn't seem to care about, except maybe in these tiny little islands like this Festival of Letters, for instance, right? So one inhabits this world all the time. If you're a woman, you inhabit it all the more strongly, right? Because there is no way of looking away from your child, right? There's no way of looking away from the suffering of, say, of the little people that you bring into this world. Or in my case, I had 2 children and so on. So what does it mean? So what does it mean for women to inhabit this real material world? Because they do so much more strongly than men, especially the domestic space. So paper and pen have their own materiality. The human mind doing the thinking is already shaped by this world of domesticity, this world of family, this world of being a parent, right? And that world seeps into everything we do, right? And it sort of colors it. And I initially, for many, many years, when I was struggling young mother, and I was trying to make sense of my daughter's learning disability, I was trying to sort of get her through all of those school years, very tough years. And I was also trying to hold on to my career as a professor. I was trying to sort of also keep the household going and also hold on to my writing life, right? It felt like perhaps my writing life was the ball that I was dropping all the time, that I wasn't a good enough writer for some reason, right? Again, an imposter syndrome, like the moment that I stepped into this room and I saw these three people who have brought out these wonderful biographies and so on. But I think the thing is, the point is, there is really no escaping from who you are and from the life situations you're in, and then you'd better make the most of it. And I think you should think highly of that, right? Which is something I slowly and very, very gradually, I began to trust that life and to trust that I could make literature from that life, right? So really, in a sense, this kind of child disability story is something that sort of came from my own life experience. Right? So what I will do is I'll sort of very briefly, there isn't that much time. I think I've come at the fag end of this panel. So I'm just going to sort of begin with a bit of a personal account. Since in my work, the personal sort of segueing into the political is there. All my work comes from my poetry, my non-fiction, and so on. So I grew up as the daughter of a single mother who was a divorcee. This was back in the 1970s. My grandparents who lived with us almost until their passing, and my mother made up my whole family. So it was a shaped family, if you will. And this was way back in the 1970s when divorce was really a stigma. It was unthinkable, except in the most extreme of circumstances. And most single women, like my mother, were single only by virtue of having been widowed. My mother was an exception because she was actually formally divorced. So there was so little support or no support from my father's side, and I didn't have any kind of extended family on that side, not much on my mother's either. So this was sort of the background, and from that background to think of yourself as a writer was very difficult. But I'll also write this and say that my mother eventually, in her late 40s actually, after struggling through that life, turned to a life of being a writer. She wrote in Tamil, her name is Vatsala. And she wrote these two wonderful novels in Tamil, both of which I translated. Once There Was a Girl and The Scent of Happiness, from the Tamil into English. And both of these were novels, but they drew on life material. And I could recognize myself in it. I could recognize the dysfunctional nature of the family in that book, and both the books. And I asked her, why would you not put it out as autobiographies? Why does it have to be a novel? I mean, this was your life. It's just fairly thinly disguised. And the reason she, of course, gave me, and it won't surprise anybody in this room, is that many of the people in the book are still living. And if I were to write it as an autobiography, they are going to be very, very upset with me. And I don't want to, so that's the thing. That's the reason why, to write an autobiography is also sort of like an act of courage, right? And when you can't do that, you have to veil it. Right? It has to come through as poetry, it has to come out as fiction, but using and drawing on that kind of life material. Right? So I will, what I will do is, I'll read you a few of my, just a few of my poems that largely draw on autobiographical material, really, and these are from the Sahityaka Akademi. Came out, 3 Women in a Single Room House. 3 women in a single room house. 1. Not too small, not too big. This apartment with its balcony on which our son can ride his tricycle, its kitchen with no walls, so we can cook and still belong to the rest of the house is what I sold my diamonds for. Thinking over the agent's glibness of my grandmother who had bequeathed them to me. They had once shone talisman-like in the dark of that small room. She, my mother, and I, on the floor in a row, 3 women used to small spaces. 2. My mother is sitting on the only bed in the only room in the house, writing something. When she is done, I find an ink stain on the sheet. One of them is an outstretched wing. 3. My grandmother is working a sewing machine in a corner of the only room in the house. She's making me a dress 2 sizes too large. So you can grow into it, she says. And when it is done, go on, try it. 4. It was never more than 7 steps from anywhere to the only window in the single-room house. And I would like to tell you that the sky floated in through the slats, filled us, my grandmother, my mother and I, with spaciousness. I would like to tell you that we learned to take up space. The truth is, we just grew used to small spaces, the 3 of us, rough diamonds stuck in mines that ran too deep to catch the light. Thank you. So I'll give you another poem which again is autobiographical, but I think fairly veiled. It's called "The Thing About Being an Older Woman Is This." The thing about being an older woman is this: there is a certain knowing that you find yourself carrying, a kind of heavy knowing, and then there is the remembering of how you were once a solid teak chair that people paid no heed to, but sat on always. And the remembering of how every day you drowned a little and only managed by clutching at froth, and how the froth helped and you got yourself to a kind of shore and were finally able to breathe. Short breaths, mind you, very short, and the lines you started to write were at first the gasps of dying fish. But then you found that the poems didn't have to be written the way laundry had to be done, the way children had to be raised, but that you must write the poems you must write, gently and with love for yourself. You must release yourself into waterways, for until you do that, the knowing is going to be heavy. Sand that has snuck into the hem of your skin, lint that has stuck to your soul and won't come up. I'll stop by reading a short excerpt from my book about being the parent of a young person now with a learning disability. And you'll be glad to know she's doing well, but the book was written at a time, parts of it at least were written at a time when things were really quite hard. Just give me a moment. So this is the title essay from the book. It's called This Kind of Child. I'll read you just an excerpt. I distinctly remember that bleak November day in 2015, the skies grey and grieving, just as I was for my daughter whom we had pulled out of school a couple of months ago. There she lay huddled under a light quilt, unmindful of the blare of school bus horns, seemingly oblivious to the light that was passing her by. I grieved because I was convinced that she would never find her way back into the maze that counted as education. It seemed to me that she was lost and hopelessly so. If the liberal Montessori school to which we had admitted her could fail her so badly, what chance did she have in any other? And by extension, what chance really did she have in this difficult world? She had joined India's millions of left-behind children, and it didn't seem to me at the time that she would ever catch up with the rest. Dyslexia, or whatever it was that passed for it, had failed her. It had tripped her up. As I sat at her bedside that morning, it occurred to me that my daughter had no place to turn to, that the 4 of us, her father, her brother, her grandmother, and I, would somehow have to become that place. Home was the only school that would take her. My daughter was 9 when we took her out of school. I couldn't help thinking of her first day at school. She had gone in with sparkling eyes and feet that danced to music that only she could hear. My husband's aunt remarked once that she was like a small butterfly with her light and happy movements. All through those early school years, I had read to her and to my son stories and poems at bedtime, and whenever the opportunity presented itself. My son had become an independent reader at some point. The transition had been so smooth, so organic that I barely noticed. As for my daughter, she clearly enjoyed listening to the stories I read her, knew them all by heart. She had a great sense of the spoken word, often spoke in metaphors herself, and had sound literary judgment, except that reading and writing did not come to her easily. By the time she turned 7, I was quite certain that something was amiss, that there was a reason why she wasn't getting around to reading, even though she was obviously bright and curious and open to new ideas and was possessed of a burning desire to learn. Yeah, let's skip a few paragraphs. Yeah. And I think. Yeah, so I'll just conclude with the concluding paragraph of the essay. Over the years, what struck me about my daughter is her ability not just to survive, but also to thrive even in the most difficult of environments. It has become more and more clear to me that she has decided to let that label go, the label of dyslexia, and that she does not identify as one. In her own story, the story that inaugurates this book, the word dyslexia makes its appearance only once. More and more, I'm beginning to see that it is the environment that creates and exacerbates disabilities, a fact that holds true for all the people in the book who are its protagonists. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for listening.
इतनी देर से आप सबको सुन रहे हैं जिन्होंने कुछ काम किया है। अब मैं बोलूंगी जिसने इस फील्ड में कोई काम नहीं किया। दूसरों की जिंदगी में झांकना बहुत दिलचस्प है। उस तरह जैसे पुराने घरों में बीच में एक खिड़की होती थी और दोपहर में औरतें खोल लेती थी, या आज वर्तमान समय में कुछ ऐसा कि आपका घर ऊंचा हो और दूसरे का आंगन आपके आप उनकी सारी गतिविधि देख रहे हैं, तो कुछ ये कैफियत है। हिंदी में बहुत शिकायत रही सबको कि कोई भी ऑटोबायोग्राफी लेखक लेखिकाओं की इस तरह से नहीं आई जितनी दूसरी भारतीय भाषाओं में आई। कुसुम अंसल की पहली ऑटोबायोग्राफी आई और उसके बाद एक सिलसिला हो गया। और मैं अगर देखें तो दलित लोगों ने जब अपनी ऑटोबायोग्राफी लिखी तो हम उनके दुखों के ज्यादा करीब चले गए। जो सहानुभूति हमको थी वो सहानुभूति डबल हो गई। उसके बाद हम देखते हैं कि इधर काम तो बहुत हुआ है थर्ड जेंडर पे, लेकिन थर्ड जेंडर ने खुद जब अपना लिखा और अपने एहसास को बयान किया तो हम ज़्यादा परेशान हुए और हमारी आंखें खुली। तो मेरे ख्याल से जिंदगी दूसरों की देखना, उन लोगों की देखना जो आज पूंजीपति हैं और टॉप के जिसे कहते हैं हमारे डेवलपमेंट में हाथ बटाते हैं, उन्होंने 2 रुपए से चीज़ें शुरू की। तो जब हम इस तरह की चीज़ें पढ़ते हैं तो हमें कुछ जवाब मिल जाता है सवालों का, कुछ हम हिम्मत कर लेते हैं। और एक चीज़ और भी है, कुछ चीज़ें तफरीहन लिखी जाती हैं। मैं सोचती हूँ कि ये काम बहुत मुश्किल है, खासकर अपने को दोहराना। कैसे आप चीज़ों को खंगोलेंगे